Hi guys, and welcome to my review of the Celest Yaksha. This is Celest Audio's latest IM. As some of you well will know, this is the more budget IMs that XINHS makes. We have XINHS, we have Queen of Audio, and of course Celest. The Yaksha is a 2DD single BA single micro planar driver of the BA style of shape, so the real small planar driver, which goes against what usually Celest has used in previous applications of microplanars, which has been the round style of microplanar flat driver, kind of looking like a DD, like a small DD 6mm that we see in the Queen of Audio, the Mimosa, and as well in the Celest Phoenix Gold. As for the dynamic drivers in the Yaksha, there are two of them, 10 and an 8. The 8 handles the low bass, the 10 then handles the mid bass and the mids. So the meat and potatoes of the frequency range is handled by that 10mm driver, complemented then in the lower end by that 8mm to really give it that rumble in that low end. And then the single BA and the microplanar clean up the mids and the highs and give it the necessary crispness and let's say twinklies and sparklies. Anyway, the case is the packaging is the usual Celest kind of affair. It's nice, it's understated, some details in the back. I mean, I think the only relevant one really is the impedance, which is 12 ohms, which is relatively low. I did notice that it does take a little bit more volume than needed, so it will being such a low impedance, it will require let's say a source that will be more current driven than necessarily voltage driven, and that's basically it. I mean, there's really not much more in terms of the accessories. It brings this case, which is something that we've seen already before, used by some other brands. I will say, I mean, it's not that it's a bad case, but I would have preferred a more, let's say, usual case that Queen of Audio uses, like this one from like I said, from Queen of Audio, more all leatherette style case. I think it just looks more the business and actually goes with the brand as well a little bit better. This sort of plastic style case is usually something that you see in, I mean, you see it in like TRN and so on, and it's the small details. But anyway, this is just a nitpick. The tips are pretty decent. They look like the KB07 tips. The other decent thing that they've actually done here is the cable, which is it's a nice color, nice gauge cable, decent. Just the fact that it's just for 3.5mm, it's not an exchangeable or interchangeable tips or connectors rather. And then the IM itself, it is a relatively big IM in the fact that you have that 10 and that 8 that need to sit side by side, and then you got that microplanar as well and the BA. So it's not a small IM, but it's also not a cumbersome IM. It fit pretty decently in my ears. It's a nice resin shell. I mean, I really can't complain, honestly. It's not a heavy IM. It's nicely built, it's ergonomic, it sits well in my ear, no complaints. In terms of price, this is about $139, $135, $139, which sits nicely in the progression of IMs that I've brought out to you, which is actually the Queen of Audio Mimosa, which is $99, and then the Phoenix Core, which is $119. So we have here a hybrid, two drivers, a 10 and a microplanar of 6mm. In the Phoenix Core, we go for 5 drivers. We got 2 BAs, 2 microplanars of about 6mm, and then the single 7mm bass driver. And then here we've got that, like I mentioned before, a 10 and 8 DD and a microplanar of like that BA style. So we've got, let's say, 3 different approaches from XINHS. Obviously they all have their different tuning and everything, and the idea here wasn't to compare and choose a winner or a loser. It was more to understand where the Yaksha sits in between these other 2 offerings from XINHS. Let's put it that way. Excuse me. The Phoenix Call, and I've got here the standard version, not the limited edition version, which has got a little bit more bass and a slightly cleaned up mids. The Phoenix Call followed the more, let's say, an IVipQ style tuning. And what does that mean? It means some really forward mids. They start rising at about 1k, but they peak at 1.5k. So your mids are nice and forward. Loads of detail in the mids and the upper mids and treble. The bass being a 7mm, they had to emphasize more the mid bass than necessarily the low bass. Although I can't really say that there is any low bass lacking, but of course the star of the show is the mids and the highs. The Phoenix Call is, of the three, the one that is the most affected by whatever dongle or deck or whatever you connect up to it. And it's actually quite interesting, because if I use the TP50 or I use the Yuki on any one of these three, that's one thing. If I use something like an AKM chipped dongle, there is a little bit of a change in the sound of the Mimosa, there is a little bit of a change in the sound of the Yaksha, but the one that really changes the sound significantly is the Phoenix Call, and the Phoenix Call becomes significantly more bass heavy with a AKM chip inside. The actual way that the circuitry interacts with the IEM boosts the bass significantly. It lowers the mids, upper mids and trebles slightly, and it just changes completely the whole dynamics of the Phoenix Call. So I would say that for those that bought the Phoenix Call and perhaps found the Phoenix Call overly clinical or over sterile, which is something that I heard some people talk about, I would say try some dongles, play around with some dongles, and definitely the ESS dongle will not be the best application or the best choice. I found, like I said, the Cirrus Logic, the TP50, TP35, Yuki, I found that to be the best compromise. While yes, the most fun was the AKM, like a FIO or something like that, but the AKM did have a tendency of perhaps making it overly warm to a certain extent, or I wouldn't say warm, but overly muddy in the bass. The 7mm driver, being a smaller driver, does make the bass nice and clean and dynamic, although there's no major quantity or there's no loads of bass there, but it's a nice clean dynamic bass that it's focuses on quality. Once you use an AKM, especially like the Acme dongle, which is one of the ones that I used, I did notice that the bass kind of lost a little bit of that cleanliness and that detail and that quality. It became more emphasized, more fun, more interesting for certain genres, but it lost that quality. But anyway, I'm dabbling here too much on the Phoenix Call. On to the Yaksha, which is what we want to know. And the Yaksha, I feel, is an interesting compromise between the Mimosa and between the Phoenix Call. And what do I mean by that? I mean that if the Phoenix Call is perhaps too emphasized or too focused on the mids and upper mids, and slightly leaner in terms of the bass, especially if you're not careful with the dongle, the Mimosa has excellent bass all the way. I mean, it's a really excellent bass. It does a phenomenal job as well in the mids, and then it's got a lot of highs, basically because of that microplanar. So this one will perhaps sound more V-shaped, while this is more that kind of an IVipQ style of tuning. The Yaksha is a kind of a nice in between. It's got basically the bass of the Mimosa, and then the little bit mid energy, especially in that mids to upper mids transition, than the Mimosa, while still maintaining a good level across the rest of the upper mids and the treble. Maybe not as much ultimate extension as the Mimosa, and what that gives us is perhaps the most, although not the best, what I'm about to say, but it's probably the one that sounds the most Harman of the three. So more Harman style tuning, more V-shaped tuning, and a more I guess the best way to put it is really the Noli VX style of forward tuning. So mids and vocals are the star of the show here. And that basically means that these IMs are going to be catered for three different groups of people. The one that will perhaps be the most pleasant for the majority of people, and the most, let's say, efficient with more genres of music, will be the Yaksha, followed by the Mimosa, and then the Phoenix Call. And why do I put it in this manner? Only because the Phoenix Call has that issue of the dongle. So depending on which dongle you use, you're going to change the character of the Phoenix Call quite significantly. And mind you, I'm a big fan of the Phoenix Call. I've always been a fan of the Phoenix Call from day one. So, I mean, for me to say this, it's not like I'm now throwing it under the bus. No, not at all. I'm just trying to make sure that you guys understand that the Phoenix Call will be the one that is more affected by external factors. The Mimosa and the Yaksha, not so much. So bass on the Yaksha is really nice. It's got a nice gliding style of bass, much like on the Mimosa. Gliding style of bass, good energy in the sub bass, good energy in the mid bass. That 1 kilohertz point that I like looking at, it corresponds to close to 2K, about 1.8, 1.9, but because what we have doing the mids is a dynamic driver, so that mid bass, that mids to upper mids area doesn't sound as maybe overly energetic or out of balance compared to the sub bass if we were talking about something that was using BAs. And the perfect example, or the perfect way to exemplify this, is you're listening to the Yaksha, and you're listening to the Phoenix Call, and putting aside the fact that obviously the Yaksha's got more bass, you notice that the mids in the Phoenix Call are mids which are more forward. Yes, they are more clinical, more sterile, okay, while the mids on the Yaksha are more organic, more old school. And you know, obviously, all things considered, if you ask me which is the ones that I prefer, I would say the Yaksha. That this sounds more realistic, less fatiguing ultimately. As for the rest of the frequency response of the Yaksha, the extension then, or the transition from the upper mids into the treble, is flawless. There's no sharpness, no aggressiveness, and then there's a nice roll off. There's no aggressiveness in any way or shape or form in the upper end of the Yaksha. If there is any area that maybe and occasionally on one or two songs of what I like listening to, I found sounded just a little bit overly forward, or just jumped ahead a little bit in level as compared to the bass and then to the treble, it's that area there of let's say 2.5 to 4K, and even then this was by no means aggressive or sharp or anything. No, you just felt that the energy that was present in that area was just a little bit higher than the accompanying frequency responses of the extremes. Other than that, I can't really criticize or find any point of criticism that's significant. It's a solidly tuned IM. It's got a nice tuning. You can definitely feel the tuning of Chimera, the house sound of Chimera is there present. And one of the IEMs that, funny enough, I was surprised, and it kind of reminded me, and I said, "No, this sounds familiar. I have to listen to it." It was the Chimera, the Urd, which is a tribrid costing $600 and something that they have. And I actually took out the Urd and compared it with the Yaksha, and I'll show you the graphs now in a second, and it was actually quite interesting to see that although they are similarities here and there in the graph, I mean, it's not, when you listen to it, it's actually quite surprising how the two of them sound very much the same. There's the same sort of tonality, the same sort of bass they're very equal. I mean, trust me, very, very equal. Actually, you know what? Let me actually just show you the graphs, and you guys can take your own conclusions from what I'm about to say. So just a second, just bear with me. Anyway, let's talk now the graphs. I've actually started off with the graph for the Phoenix score to show exactly what I was meaning about the Phoenix call using the TP50 and the Phoenix call using the Acme. And it's there, it's self-explanatory. The Acme boosts the bass frequencies quite a bit. I mean, we're talking about a difference from one dongle to the other of almost 4 dBs, and it lowers the bass ever so slightly. And then that balance that I always like looking at, if with the TP50 we are looking at about 1.4K more or less, so plenty for the mids. With the Acme, it's roughly 2K, give or take, as that corresponding point is basically in line with the bass. So you feel that the sound with the Acme or with the FIO is going to be a warmer sound, maybe less fatiguing ultimately, because you got that extra energy of the bass. But that same bass as well at the same time is a little bit thicker, and just it's not as clean. It's not by any means bad or anything of the sort, but you know, if you go back and forth from one dongle and the other, you notice, and I think most will agree that you know, even with that factor that the Phoenix score can sound a little bit overly clinical at times, it still is the most balanced using the TP50 or the Yuki or something along those lines, instead of the Acme. The Acme just sounds too colored. Okay. So that's the Phoenix score. This now is the Queen of Audio, the Mimosa. I've normalized them at all at about 500 hertz, and there's a huge difference in terms of this mids to upper mids reproduction of one and the other. The 100 hertz point corresponds to about 3.5K. Nice sub bass. I mean, the Mimosa was and is a phenomenal IM. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I really do like it. If it's got one thing going for it, it definitely doesn't fatigue you. The only thing is that those highs can sometimes just be a little bit, I wouldn't say overwhelming, but they can be just too much because of that lack of a little bit of more mids here to accompany them. So you get definitely that feeling of a V-shaped, okay? And then finally, let's put here, let me just show you the Yaksha by itself first, and then I'll put all three. And then finally, yeah, the Yaksha, again, that gliding style of bass. The 100 hertz point here corresponds to almost 2K. It's like 1.9 roughly. So, you know, it's not an issue. What exists here in terms of bass counteracts any possible aggressiveness that's here. But like I said earlier, we have a dynamic driver doing this this part here of the frequency range. So it's a dynamic driver tonality handling the mids, and it just sounds different. I mean, with the Phoenix call, this whole area, obviously we have more of it and earlier, but this you notice that you can feel that tonality, and that timbre is not the tonality, the timbre of a dynamic driver doing those frequencies. So I guess if you have if you have a really attentive ear, you can really even distinguish that some drivers are doing this frequency and other drivers are doing that, while on the Yaksha that coherence of drivers is much more well obtained. You can definitely feel that there's a more well matched integration of all the drivers, which again is something that in the Mimosa you do notice. There's that disparity between the dynamic driver and the microplanar, although it's not as bad or as noticeable rather as on the Phoenix core. But anyway, going back here to the Yaksha, Nice gliding bass, plenty mid bass energy, really well executed mids, and then the extension past 10k, nicely executed. Honestly, really nothing that I can point as a negative aspect. Just to show you quickly what I meant about the urd. This is the urd, and you can see a lot of similarities of what I was talking about. The same sort of bass. We have an 8mm as well on the urd. We have an 8mm on the Yaksha. The urd then has two BAs and the ESTs handling the rest of the frequency. But the implementation of the BAs has been done in a way that the integration of those drivers, the coherence in which they match each other is flawless, and so it doesn't even feel like there's a BA doing the mids and the upper mids. There's no timbre associated with BAs, and that's where then they actually, this area, although graphing differently, actually sounds very similar. And then the upper frequency, yes, okay, fine, the ESTs do clean up the sound very nicely and do come across in a very detailed manner, and I'm in no way even trying to say that the ESTs do not surpass the performance of the microplanar, because they do. But you can see that in terms of the frequency of one and the other, they're very similar and the same, and you have then the same sort of extension. It's the quality that exists there from one sort of driver doing those frequencies and the other sort of driver doing those, that then differentiates them. But trust me when I tell you, I mean, the urd is a $650 IEM. The Yaksha is $130, so you can basically buy 4 Yakshas for the price of an urd. And I would dare say that the Yaksha will give you, I would say, about 85% of the urd's performance in most instances. That's pretty impressive in my books. I mean, that's really pretty solid performance. And that's that, guys. I hope I was able to help out in explaining how the Yaksha compares to some of its siblings. It's definitely an IM that has a specific crowd. That's undeniable, and I would say that the crowd of people that will like the Yaksha will be more numerous than the people that will like, or that liked the Phoenix Call, and that even like the Mimosa. I mean, the Mimosa, for the price that it has, it's a really good IM. You can't criticize it there. Neither can you criticize the Phoenix Call. They're all really well priced. In that aspect, Canera has really done their work. But I think that all things considered, like I mentioned earlier, price, accessories, sound, overall balance, coherence, driver matching, everything. When you start considering all the things, the one that I feel ticks the most boxes and comes out just edging out slightly the Mimosa is the Yaksha, and it edges out very well the Phoenix Call. I mean, compared to the Phoenix Call, it is a superior IM. I would even say, if you were to ask me, Tony, so how would you grade the 3, or how would you position the 3? I would say the Yaksha first, the Mimosa close second, and then the Phoenix Call in third place. And the Phoenix Call in third place only because the way it was tuned when it was released 3 years ago, or roughly 2022, I think, or 2023, I don't recall now. The tuning, that's the way they wanted it, and it's actually curious, because if you listen to the limited edition, I think to a certain extent resolved a few of those problems. And the main issue at the end of the day of the Phoenix Call, I think, is the fact that it's just a little bit overly energetic in the mids, upper mids, and treble when it takes into account the bass that it has, and the fact that it's only got a 7mm driver. If the Phoenix Call, instead of having a 7mm driver, had a 10mm driver, or a 9mm, or let's say the dynamic driver of the Adonis version 2, matched with the microplaners and BAs that they have, so a similar configuration but using the dynamic driver of the Adonis, I think that in that configuration the Phoenix Call would be a very, very good IM, very seriously a very serious contender for that specific price point that it's at. Alright guys, as always, like and subscribe. Anything you want to ask me or need to know, please feel free to shoot me a message, and I'll do my best to answer. Alright, you take care now. Bye bye.